Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me make sure I'm up. I'm seeing green. I'm going to take that green as me being active. Let me check my sound. I always check my sound starting off. I learned that lesson the hard way. Doing videos with sound completely off. Alright, that looks good. And my playback looks good. Perfect. And perfect. Hope everyone is doing okay this afternoon. This is lunchtime. First, coming up on Monday, Hard Bastard will be here. That should be an amazing show. Hard Bastard is fucking awesome. And beyond that, I want to thank everyone for their support on the channel. You guys are immensely appreciated. Thank you very much. If you like the videos, if you share the videos, if you donate through Patreon or Super Cash, you guys are absolutely appreciated. Thank you. Let's hop back across the pond. And in hopping across the pond, I want to focus in on one Mr. Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is a Labour leader. Well, he's a leader of the Labour Party. No one thought that Jeremy Corbyn could be leader of the Labour Party because, kind of like in the United States, they had this idea that the spectrum of politics is only very narrow and that the public wouldn't support anything within that spectrum. The catch is that spectrum was narrow because that spectrum needed to be narrow for them to succeed in politics. People were looking and clamoring for something different, and they found Corbyn. They have found one way after another to attack Corbyn, and for all intents and purposes, those ways have failed, and Corbyn has remained Corbyn. Now, he's coming up with his probably biggest challenge. Whenever a leftist or populist revolt is into play, all of a sudden, lo and behold, there becomes some kind of external threat that needs to be taken care of, in which case the right gets more hawkish and pushes the left in a way that the left needs to respond and needs to respond in a rational way to try to get the public on their side. Oftentimes, the public does not respond in a rational way, and these external threats can be used to beat down labor. Now, what I mean by this, the war movements in the United States, meaning every time they had a war in the United States, it put down leftist movements. The state was able to get additional powers, and so ideas like protests, revolt, those things became much more of a treacherous engagement. Think of World War I, like during the time of Woodrow Wilson, where you had socialists going to prison protesting either the war effort and workers' rights in the United States. The British case is slightly different. Britain has a host of issues that are addressing Britain, Brexit being one of them, and to be honest, not really having a solution to Brexit being a main one. Now, if you were a weak prime minister and you had a populist revolt on your hands, you had the Labour Party getting mass following, mass support, while you yourself floundered, where it may not even look as if the government would be able to make it through the year, let alone the next week, but not alone the next few years. Having an external threat right now to obfuscate in the same way the Democrats are using an external threat that doesn't exist to obfuscate may come in handy. Yes, that's somewhat of a hypothesis of mine, but that hypothesis usually follows out and makes sense. I mean, fact is, Russia doesn't really have a reason to do this. This looks a little weird to me. It also looks a little weird to me that she doesn't want to have an investigation and she doesn't want anyone else to see the evidence other than her, that she wants everyone to take her word for it. That seems weird to me. I don't understand why anybody would do that. I understand why the United States would do that. We're run by maniacs and idiots. But what on earth would be the reason for the other states of the UK, I mean, of the European Union or Germany or France or anybody else to do this? Britain, the citizens of Britain. At which point do you jump to a conclusion without having evidence? Jeremy Corbyn has asked for evidence, and that makes all the sense in the world to me. Yet and still, he's shamed in Parliament for asking for evidence. Think about that. Something happens. Something takes place. And I'm talking to the Brits. Something takes place. A spy goes down. Him and his daughter. They pass out. Oh my God, they've been poisoned. Okay, that's bad. We need to figure out what happened. What would your sane leadership be if you were in charge? If you're a Brit and you're looking for the people in the leadership position, what do you want a sane prime minister to do? Do you want the same prime minister to say, look, a spy went down. We need to figure out what happened, what took place. We need to get the international community involved if we believe it's someone else. Meaning, if we believe there's foreign play involved and there's some kind of international actor involved, we should get international assistance. We need to get in scientists, technicians. We need to determine what happened. We need to have an investigation. Yes, we can have our own people investigate this. But whatever we find in an investigation, since we're talking about some kind of international thing, we need to, at the very least, be able to show that evidence to prove what we're proving to somebody else other than us. Meaning, we can't just take our word for it. It is sane as sane can be to say, let's have an investigation first before we point the culprit. And again, I'm asking this question, what's the most sane thing? Let's say, let's have an investigation. We're going to come to a conclusion after the investigation, because we understand that the conclusions of this investigation, if they do indeed point to some kind of foreign play or foreign bad play involved, there are consequences for that. There's severe and heavy consequences for foul play in this. Ergo, we're going to wait till we have an investigation before we point a finger. Do you do that, or do you look for the first mic you can find, run out and scream, Russia did it? Fucking Russians. It is highly likely that Russia did it. And you need to come in account and tell us that you did it. Or else. Which one is sane? Fact is, the first one is sane. The second one is massively hysterical. And I'm not saying hysterical because Theresa May is a woman. I'm saying hysterical because it's actually hysterical. You didn't even have an investigation, and you're jumping to the conclusion that Russia did it. You can understand why I'm somewhat suspicious of this. No one else has seen the evidence but Theresa May. You can understand why I'm suspicious of this. For whatever reason, sanity has left the room. Sanity has left the room. This is Jeremy Corbyn addressing Parliament on this. Listen to the way they're responding to what he's saying, even though everything that he's saying is perfectly rational. It makes perfect sense, and in any other capacity will make perfect sense. Just real quick, there's a bridge. There's a bridge or walkway that went down in Florida. I think this was yesterday. Donald Trump didn't run out and say Al-Qaeda did it. Nobody ran out and said ISIS took down the bridge. The first thing they said is, we don't know what happened. We need to have an investigation. Let's look into figure out what took place first before we go pointing the finger at another nation. But again, for whatever reason, hysteria has taken over. And that makes too much sense. Let's take a look at Corbyn. He's getting jeered for making all the sense in the world.
Our response must be both decisive and proportionate, and based on clear evidence. If the government believes that it is still a possibility that Russia negligently lost control of a military-grade nerve agent, what action is being taken through the OPCW with our allies? I welcome the fact the police are working with the OPCW. And has the Prime Minister taken the necessary steps under the Chemical Weapons Convention to make a formal request for evidence from the Russian government under Article 9.2? How has she responded to the Russian government's request for a sample of the agent used in the Salisbury attack to run its own tests? Has high-resolution trace analysis been run on a sample of the nerve agent, and has that revealed any evidence as to the location of its production or the identity of its perpetrators?
That makes all the sense in the world. What am I missing? What am I missing? You can understand why I'm getting suspicious of this. What am I missing? Have you ran an analysis? And does that analysis give you any indication of where it come from. I mean, you saying that Russia has this chemical, okay, and because Russia has this chemical, Russia did it. It's as if the UK and Theresa May believes that no other country possesses the capacity of making a particular chemical. Let alone, we don't even know if it's the chemical that Theresa May is talking about because no one else has seen the evidence other than Theresa May. Brits, please be a little smarter than Americans on this. You're being had. Until you absolutely see evidence of this, I would not trust what these people are saying. Let's go to the next clip. I mean, because they're jeering him again for something else that he's saying that makes perfect sense. In a nutshell, can we see the evidence? Understand, the whole point of the opposition is to hold the government accountable. One of your last Labour governments took you into a war that killed 1 million people on the contents of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Were there weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or not? Did your media tell you that there were weapons of mass destruction? Were these parliamentarians groaning at anybody saying or coming up saying, wait a minute, are you sure they're weapons of mass destruction? You should be skeptical of your parliament. These grinning idiots have already forgotten that fast the whole weapons of mass destruction thing, and they're ready to get on their high horse and ride into this level of escalation. It makes all the sense in the world to say, what are you using to position us against a foreign power? And let alone, what are you using to position us against a foreign power? Can somebody else other than you verify this? Have you gone through the correct international channels? Have you done anything other than get on the pedestal, find the first mic you can find, and scream, Russia did it? Once again, Russia did it. Everybody wants to blame Russia for everything. You can understand my suspicion here. You can understand my suspicion here. The United States has done some really ghastly things. Yes, some of those things with this idea of killing people or framing other people for things. So you can understand I'm somewhat suspicious of this, especially since Britain is somewhat of a client state. I'm sorry, Brits, you are. You literally went to a war that you had nothing to do with on weapons of mass destruction at the behest of the United States. So forgive me for saying a client state. And being a client state, we're dealing with our own Russia hysteria. The last thing I want is it to migrate to there. If you honestly believe that Russia did it, if the Prime Minister is being honest with you, the Prime Minister should have something to show to get that across. Her word for it is massively insufficient. Let's keep going. There's one more with Corbyn.
And while suspending planned high-level contacts, does the Prime Minister agree that it is essential to maintain a robust dialogue with Russia in the interest of our own and wider international security?
They're groaning over that. They're groaning over that. Listen to that. Has the Prime Minister maintained high-level talks? This guy's a flower child. This guy's a flower child. Look, I understand that when there are barbarians at the gates, people lose their rational thinking. And they get up into this kind of fervor of war and everything else. It's their little lizard brain that kicks off. I understand. I get it. There are no barbarians at your gates. You had 2 spies, or a spy and his daughter, that went down from a poisoning attack. I understand. You don't necessarily like it. If your Prime Minister is being honest with you, that's the only point I'm getting at. Is it possible Russia did it? Yes. Is it possible Russia didn't do it? Yes. That's also possible. That is also true. Fact is, you don't know. You're going on the word of your government. Governments are not to be trusted. If they have something, they should be able to show something, and it should be held up for international scrutiny. It should be something other than the government of your country telling you that this is true. Jeremy Corbyn is doing what Jeremy Corbyn is supposed to do. He is being loyal opposition to your country. If you guys had loyal opposition to your country when they took you into Iraq, maybe you wouldn't have went into Iraq. Maybe you wouldn't have killed or been part of killing those million people that died as a response to the actions that the United States and your government took. What I'm trying to get across to you is this is what this looks like. They don't even send the little vial of white powder to the UN. They send a letter. You did it and confess. You did it and confess. And now there are all these ridiculous things on there attacking Jeremy Corbyn because Jeremy Corbyn had sense to ask the question, where's the beef? Where's the evidence? Can we see something other than your word for this? Jeremy Corbyn wrote a piece in The Guardian getting his point across in the attack. And at the end of the day, his point was, and I'm putting a piece at the bottom, you can read it, but it's very simple. This attack was appalling. This should never happen on anybody's soil, let alone on British soil. That being said, we should find who actually did it, and we should not just take the word of the government as if it's the word of God, and we should seek evidence, and we should seek international cooperation, seeing as we're dealing with international matters. We should not do this in this kind of unipolar way or this unitary way and go about our affairs. Do you know they're at the point where it's possible, they've downplayed it, but it's possible they can invoke EU or NATO status, meaning lumping all of those countries together in this kind of militaristic thing against Russia. I'm trying to understand or give you the context of what's taking place and give you the severity of what's taking place. Meaning what Theresa May is doing is dragging you closer into a war. She is escalating this, unnecessarily escalating this. And she has not even put her hands or given anybody else evidence. Theresa May wears beautiful blazers. That is not the same thing as evidence of something that has international consequences. That's my point. That's my point. Britain needs to hold the perpetrators to account, yet this is not a time for hasty judgments that could lead to a new Cold War. I want to talk I have another video coming up on this, but I want to talk about in the other video about how they use the stuff to attack the left. Because they do. They do. Jeremy Corbyn is, look, he's not into this thing of, I just want to have unmitigated military escapades and all this other stuff. His first thought is, first, is it Russia? If it is Russia, there's larger consequences for it being Russia. By the same token, if you're working in government, you know the government is not necessarily to be trusted and that they do things at times for political ends. Britain had people in order to knock off other people, meaning Britain has also used kill lists. The United States has used kill lists. Israel has used kill lists. So it's not the insane thing that the governments will go around killing people. Governments do. The United States was going to paint a plane in order to get it shot down in order to create a pretext for war against the Soviet Union. That's something we were going to do. We're going to bomb a boat in order to kill Cubans, in order to give a pretext to go into Cuba. That is something that we did. The Gulf of Tonkin never took place. We didn't go into Libya in order to help for humanitarian reasons. I'm trying to get across to you that governments do things that are extraordinarily shady, and they do things for reasons that are not necessarily what they tell the public. Be skeptical of your government. They are dragging you into a conflict. And the fact is, her not showing evidence of anything is worrying. It's very worrying. It's indicative of them either not having evidence or not being able to show the evidence for implication of something else that they themselves were doing. Which one is it? Which one is it? If this really was a case that they were looking to solve in the way that she's talking about being looking to solve, they would have an investigation first. The fact that they're not having an investigation first and they're jumping to the conclusion of who did it, meaning the conclusion was already baked into the cake. It's not about finding evidence. It's about the conclusion. It's about the conclusion. Let's see who's here. Jeremy Corbyn is so cool. Yeah, I like Jeremy Corbyn too. Russia stands in the way of their gas and oil pipelines. The United States go for world domination as per. Well, if that's true, then that's the end of the world. If that's true. Do you know there's a helicopter that went down in Syria? They're calling it Western Iraq. More likely than that, it's probably Syria. That helicopter very well could have been shot down, and the United States is playing down the fact that the helicopter was shot down. Russia has already said that if they attack Damascus, that Russia would respond. We're literally talking about the end of the world. Understand? And that is not Russia causing the end of the world. Be very clear on that. That is us. That is us. I quite believe the worst majority who propagate Russia is the higher tensions for weapons sales and not outright war, but still means it's dangerous. Yes, it is dangerous. So are we talking war in the near future? That's what it sounds. Theresa May could literally go and say, Russia attacked us. I am invoking the UN Charter or the NATO Charter of nation states to kick off all of these legal processes that they've kicked off based on the agreements that these guys have made for the NATO nations. I'm trying to get across the severity of this. You have lefties, Cenk Uygur, calls himself a lefty, talking about Nerf bombs. He's fucking insane. These guys are actually moving closer and closer to the brink of war. This Russia hysteria that's taken over the United States is terrifying. These people are maniacs. They literally believe, and this is for historical posterity, in case somebody sees this video 50, 100 years into the future after we've gone. They actually believe that Russia is this all-consuming threat. We spend $1 trillion a year in military murdering and massacres. $1 trillion. The amount of money that we spent on our military budget, the increase in that military budget, was more than what Russia spends on their entire military. I'm trying to get across to you the ridiculousness of what you're being sold as a threat. And you're being sold that threat for political reasons. That's what I'm saying. That's precisely what I'm saying. Hey, Luca Clemente, until evidence is presented, there is no reason to trust any government. Exactly. Governments are not to be trusted. Flat, they're not to be trusted. We need to organize our affairs in a way that makes sure that people look at this stuff with a certain amount of skepticism. They're human beings who have political reasons for the things that they do. They're not to be trusted. They're not to be trusted until they show you the actual evidence that you yourself can peruse and look at. And media are stenographers. The media are stenographers. So even they have to be taken with skepticism. I'm sorry. This is where I come from. Britain, RU was absolutely correct for sample. Yes. Russia was absolutely correct for sample. UK was foolish to deny the request. Not just deny the request, Guard. They cheered him. They jeered him for asking. He says, hey, have you answered what Russia was asking? These are international relations. They're denigrating Russia in the international relations. Understand what's taking place. Somebody says, you're accusing us of a crime. Fair enough. Can we get samples of what you're accusing us with? Meaning, if you're accusing us, you have to have something to accuse us with. You're accusing us just out of hand? And to turn us down after, accusing us, that's fucking insane. That makes you look, it doesn't make you look foolish. It makes you look like you're lying. It makes them look like they're lying. Sure, Putin is awful, but that's STMH for the Russians to judge. Yeah, that's for the Russians. That's not for us. Like, when I'm coming across, and I'm talking about international affairs, I talk about this from the standpoint of more of a libertarian standpoint. Leave me to my devices and leave them to their devices. If the Russians want to change their country, then the Russians change their country. Putin is their issue. Putin is not my issue. Putin is not my issue. If it was a situation where Putin was trying to invade my country, then yes, we have issues. But that's not the case to which we're presented with. That is his sphere of influence. That is not my sphere of influence. I have nothing to do with that situation. Nothing at all. The mistake is even pretending to treat the red baiters rationally. They're lying. They should be shamed, laughed, and driven into obscurity out of hand. Agreed, Bob. Agreed. Agreed. Stable genius progressives. I don't like this talk when people say the Russians. It sounds nationalistic and xenophobic. If you say Putin, the Russian gangsters, is more specific, less ignorant sounding. Stable genius progressive. Agreed. But that's the way they talk about them. They act like the Russians is the entire thing. One of the guys on Real News made the point that he says in the old days it was communism, like they would focus on communism, and now they focus on Russians, like people, human beings, as if all of Russia was just one person that they heaped all their scorn on. It's extremely xenophobic. Extremely xenophobic. Hugo Black, divide and conquer, call anyone who deviates from the narrative a Russian agent, racist, or is xenophobe. Peter Lehman, I talked to some Russians. They have valid complaints of Putin, yes, but when it comes from the West, it cannot believe the betterment for Russian people is their objective. Yeah, it's not. It's not. It's never their objective. There's an article on CNN that I was going to do where the person is writing from the perspective of, yeah, the West just doesn't care about Syria. And the perspective of the author was, the West just allows Russia and Syria to kill these people left and right, and the West doesn't do anything about it. And I want to rip the article apart. It's digital. Or at the very least, I want to slap the author. I want to slap the shit out the author. Because they're massively misleading their audience. There's no context in the article. It's written from this perspective of, well, these evil Russians and these mean Syrians were killing all of these people, and the West just stood by and just wring their hands, as if the West wasn't sending in weapons and terrorists in order to keep that conflict going on. Like there's no honesty in it. It's fucking amazing, the perspective that these people take. It's absolutely amazing. Wesley Walker Jr., I'm curious of what evidence they're going to try to fabricate. Well, Wesley, I am too. I am too. I am extremely curious on the evidence they're going to fabricate. The Jews, right. The blacks. The Mexicans. Yeah. That's what it feels like. That's right, Stable Genius. It feels extremely racist or xenophobic. Chris Foster, Churchill devised a plan to rearm the German army and attack Russians after World War II. Well, yeah, the reason why they wanted a strong Germany after World War II, because they were still scared of the Russians. It's like everybody was kumbaya after World War II. Immediately after World War II, the thought was, we need to stop those Ruskies from invading these or taking these countries. They thought a strong Germany would be a buffer against Russia. You're right. Putin is objectively better in foreign policy. Russia is quite predictable on regard. We suck ass. I think the difference is we try to be policemen of the world. Russia wants to be, I guess, policemen of their own domain, if you want to say it that way. There's a difference in those things. We're in Syria right now bitching about Russia and the Ukraine. Think about that shit. Syria is not on the border of North Carolina. Syria is in a completely different part of the world. The Ukraine is on the border of Russia. Keep the shit in perspective. They're lying to you. They're lying to you. When Jake Tapper or these guys are on the news and they're talking to you about this as if it's from our perspective on this is jaded. We have troops in Syria illegally. Syria is on their border. Just saying. I'm just saying. 20,000 wasn't just that last year. Chuck E. Cheese. Territory versus influence. Pat Hacker, we armed and instigated the Ukrainian coup as well. A bunch of neo-Nazis. Alright, guys. They want pipeline through Syria. It was all about money, wars, corporatists. Similar to Obama with, you know, they may want money and everything else. That's the end of the world. I mean, whatever they want, at the end of the day, it's the end of the world. There's no... I'm not being hyperbolic on this. Understand what I'm saying. Do they honestly believe that Russia is joking? They're not joking. I mean, we're talking about international politics. The United States pulls the shit in borders, meaning they say that such hypocritical things and lie through their teeth and everything else. If we're talking about international politics, the politics that plays here is fundamentally different over there, I would imagine. If Putin and Russia has said, we're going to strike if you do this, then they have to strike if the United States does this. That is the provocation of a war. That helicopter, I keep saying, that helicopter that went down in Syria, that could have been shot down. Understand what the news would be if Russia shot down that helicopter. What would be the mechanics of the events that take place immediately after that? Explain to me. Do you honestly believe that Russia made those hypersonic missiles or those hypersonic nuclear weapons just to make hypersonic nuclear weapons? Just saying. Corbyn is who we were hoping Bernie was. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Luca Clemente, Progressive Voice, says you're wrong, Jamal. He can say whatever he wants. It's one of those kids that got detention yesterday for walking out. I mean, that's assuming he walked out. Barbara Mercer, it's no accident they use a club against Trump and Corbyn. Even Sanders reveals his true colors by yelling Russia. Well, yeah, but Corbyn difference in this is he doesn't bow. He didn't bow down. He didn't immediately contort himself into. He did what he was supposed to do for the sake of Britain, loyal opposition. If there was more loyal opposition, Britain might not have went into that war in Iraq. Think about that. If it was Corbyn instead of Blair, Britain would not have gone into that war with Iraq. You may not have a conservative government right now. Your country might have been fundamentally different than what it is today. Just saying. It's pretty dumb to push Russia too far. If they really want it, why wouldn't they just sell some of the nuclear warheads to some terrorist groups who would be crazy enough to use them on us? Because those terrorist groups might be crazy enough to use them on them too. Look, part of the folly of what the United States has done in arming these groups is that these groups have been used to attack us. The weapons that we've given them, guys, have been used on us. I read a report the other day where they were talking about the weapons that ISIS were using were well beyond the weapons that they would have gotten off the battlefield. That for all intents and purposes, they were getting their hands on weapons from Saudi Arabia and the United States. We're arming terrorists. I love George Galloway too, but I don't think he's in Parliament anymore. Now I haven't seen him in Parliament. He has YouTube stuff though. Odor Pariah, I actually had a moment when I was hoping that Putin and Trump were in on some joke fight to distract people from their internal issues, but I don't think they're that smart. I don't think Trump's that smart, but I don't know Putin, so who knows? I don't know Putin. It sounds like he's trying to keep the integrity of his country. That's what it sounds like. Just think, he was Boris Yeltsin's vice president. He was the second in command of Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin, they thought Putin was going to be a good guy for the United States because they thought he was just like Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin was a drunk. He was horrible for Russia. But him being horrible for Russia was great for the United States. They loved the idea of having somebody incompetent in position because they felt like they could use the guy. Then Putin takes over. They think he's something like Yeltsin, and Putin is not like Yeltsin. Putin is like, no, I am Russian, and I'm going to keep the integrity of Russia. You guys have fucked us over. And that was the end of that. And he looked out for the best interests of Russia, not necessarily the best interests of foreign interests, which is why they dislike him so much. Stable genius progressive. Putin is way more rich, way more intelligent, way more competent than Donald Trump. A ham sandwich is more competent than Donald Trump. We destabilize other countries and meddle in their affairs, but it's justified when we do it because we're the good guys. Yeah, Luca. And you know what's wild about it? They would say that on the news with a straight face. They would say it with a straight face. They would be like, do you meddle in elections? We do it for the right reasons. And they laugh. They openly laugh. Like, there's hysteria going on right now with the United States saying that Russia meddled in the elections. Now, simultaneously, at the exact same time, a host will sit down with somebody on national airwaves with hundreds of thousands of people watching saying, yes, we also meddle in other people's elections. We meddle in their elections, but we do it for the right reasons. We do it for the right reasons. And they don't see the incongruity in those statements. They don't see it. It's amazing to me. It's fucking amazing. Absolutely amazing. Silence of the lamb lib thing. Mass manipulation. Mass idiocy is more like it. Mass idiocy. Population control. Darlene Troyes. People get mad at me when I say we're bad. We're worse than all those others combined. We are worse than those others combined. I mean, we're worse because we get away with it, and they let us get away with it. Like, understand what I'm saying. They're going after, the International Criminal Court is going after Duterte because Duterte has had this war on drug users and dealers where he's been murdering drug dealers and paying drug gangs to go out and murder drug dealers. The criminal court doesn't like that. The criminal court will ask different, oh, we don't like you doing that. We don't like you doing that. We may bring charges. George Bush is finger painting. Think about that. George Bush. He's in his pajamas, his footy pajamas, finger painting. Tony Blair is somewhere. And the fact that he's anywhere other than a prison cell is profoundly embarrassing to all of us. But they're going after Duterte. Explain to me. One guy killed 1 million people and destabilized an entire region of the globe. He had the help of his British lapdog, Tony Blair, who sat on his lap and aided in the war plans to kill 1 million people. How on earth do they get to walk after causing such calamity and such damage? Not to mention the 4,000 Americans and the number of how many of 1,000 Brits that died in this process. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We were torturing other human beings, trying to create a link between what we just did and 9/11, and that link did not exist. We tortured one guy, waterboarded him multiple times, goes unconscious, wake him up, waterboard him again, slap him, hit him, throw him against the wall, put him in coffins, throw cold water on him, freeze him, and we find out it's the wrong guy. It's the wrong guy. Guy wasn't even part of Al-Qaeda. This is what we've been doing across the globe. This is what George Bush authorized. This is what Obama gave a pass to when he took office. And when Obama left, he allowed Trump in the same position for all intents and purposes, back where we started, but worse, with somebody who was that much more incompetent than George Bush. How do they get off? How do they get off? How does the International Criminal Court still exist and they get off? I don't understand the legitimacy of the criminal court if they get off. That's what I'm saying. I don't understand the selective justice. I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all. I fundamentally miss it. The West has been subjected to a Putin demonization campaign for the last 10 years. It has worked. An unbiased look at Putin reveals much more respectable leader than the MIC wants us to believe. I don't disrespect him because I don't know him. My point in this is these guys have been fomenting hatred and xenophobia of Russians as human beings. I'm saying that is bogus. I'm saying that the public needs to look twice and think twice when they're hearing the media reports and they're hearing politicians using things for political ends in order to attack and obfuscate from their own failures. Attack others, I should say, to obfuscate from their own failures, fuck-ups, and foibles. It's like, come on. Jamal, have you read The Assassination Complex by Jeremy Scahill? I haven't. Frosty Buckets. I haven't read it. I've seen it. There's a movie that Jeremy Scahill did. This was years ago, where he asked the question, why is the kill list getting longer? And he went from place to place talking to all of these people in all of these different areas with all of these essentially kill sites. And his final analysis of it, the kill list is getting longer because every person that you kill a bunch of innocent civilians. And in killing a bunch of innocent civilians, you're making people that hate your guts. Meaning every terrorist that you killed, you have 10 others that you miss. Not 10 others that you miss, 10 others that you created. You're continuously getting a longer list because you're creating more terrorists. Your actions in the region is creating the monsters that you're seeking. Jeremy Scahill, that movie was awesome. The movie really was good. I haven't read the book though. You cannot be called a commie by the left. Chuck E. Cheese. When you're chatting with people online, it's hard to tell if the right or the left. Richard Spencer conceded as a communist during a debate. What? A communist during a debate? He calls it blowback. Yeah, blowback. That was the CIA and the ATF, not the FBI, but yeah, good point, Brandon Wilson. Yeah, alright guys, I'm going to end this before it gets too long. I didn't want to keep this one too long, but there were a lot of people in the chat, so I wanted to be able to talk to the chat. I like my chat. I will be back probably in about 10 minutes. I want to talk about the ramifications of what's taking place in the UK. So, if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon. Thanks everyone.